Okay, so this talk I think follows on really nicely from what Sam was saying, because essentially the message that I'm presenting is to try and persuade you that there are ways of engaging students and bringing open science to student communities in a way that I hope is meaningful and effective. And because this is the first time I've done a virtual talk, particularly given the fantastic timing of all the other speakers, particularly concerned about being able to get through the material this morning. So I thought what I would do is start with my final slide, go through this, and then if nothing else, you can all switch off having heard the conclusion. So what I wanted to argue in this presentation is that if we have a goal of fostering open science, as Sam was saying, and in this talk I'm focusing on data sharing, then I think we really need to embrace the idea of starting early. That is, we don't want to leave it until somebody gets an acceptance letter from a journal that their paper is being published before they start to think about the principles of data sharing and the processes of data sharing. It'd be much better to embed it into a curriculum and also provide opportunity to make those benefits of data sharing and the consequences of it much more tangible to students. Now, we see this for open data as meaning giving students, particularly in the first instance, master's students, practice and experience with both ends of the production cycle of open data and data sharing. That is, in looking at what other people have done with data sharing and also engaging with data sharing themselves with their own projects, and ensuring they understand the purposes of data sharing as well as a variety of challenges that can face them in doing that job effectively. And also thinking about the scale of the system. What I'm going to describe to you is an ecosystem we developed, or a website that allows students to share their master's project data, as well as looking at the projects that other students have done. This was important in terms of thinking about the scale of the system that we were using. In fact, part of the secret to this is that this project started many years ago, I think over 10 years ago, when initially we weren't so much interested in data sharing and open data as issues around engaging students in statistics teaching and analysis. We wanted to be able to teach advanced statistics using student data, rather than massively scaled national level data sets or arbitrary, contrived, artificially small data sets. We thought, why not get MSc project data sets and teach students MSc data processes with those? They might be more likely to be engaged knowing that it's the sort of thing that they could be dealing with. And that's what started this process, but on the journey rather to developing it, we realized that what we were doing is getting students to think about sharing data and getting students to understand that data sharing process, which at the current time seems particularly relevant. So the system we have is called LUSTRE, which is the Lancaster University Statistics Resources. And in a nutshell, it's about bringing data management into the student experience. What it does is it presents a set of student records for master's projects, provides information about those projects that include things like participant consent forms, includes things like design constraints, the number of participants and studies, the way in which it was analysed by the student and so on, and then provides links to be able to access the data associated with that. But it's also designed so that as an online catalogue of student projects, it's potentially there to engage students with the whole life cycle of projects. So one of the filters that we have within this system is a supervisor filter. So who supervised a particular project? Now, of course, that's not generally so relevant for published work, but in the context of a student embarking on their master's course or their master's project, it can be particularly useful for them to know what projects in the past few years has Katie Alcock at Lancaster supervised, and to bring up projects that Katie supervised, so that they're likely to know what sort of work they're more likely to be doing were Katie to be their supervisor, or if it's Callum Hartley or whoever it is. So students can find out more about past projects as a form of template or guidance towards what they might be doing. But then what we also do is focus on these student records in terms of key elements that are also associated with data sharing and open data. So what are the various metadata elements that are associated with each project that can also be filtered? And as students begin to think about those processes, they can begin to appreciate how they can be vital and necessary for properly constructing archive data sets and good quality data sets. So there's a resource kit, and again, this very much links to what Sam was saying. The first link on this slide is to the LUSTRE webpage itself, where student records are held. The second one is to a GitHub repository where the code for the LUSTRE system was developed. And the third is an OSF page where, for example, the teaching materials that we use to talk to students about data sharing and how this system will be used is provided. Also on that OSF page, a blank data acquisition form that we use to give to students that they fill out to make apparent what information we want for the LUSTRE system to work. So part of the process is not just to say to students, your MSc project needs to involve data sharing and you need to provide us with the data, but to try and train the students on that purpose. So they have a session as part of their curriculum on data sharing and data archiving, where we look at a range of issues in terms of how data sharing happens in academic publications, the advantages of it, the gains from it, and also the potential difficulties with it, particularly around anonymization and so on, and then also provide ways for students to think about how to do that. Essentially, students later on will go off and do their research project, and after they've submitted their project, we ask them to send that data acquisition form along with the data itself, along with a consent form, to a shared email account, which is displayed here, and we use that as a simple way of capturing the data and capturing the records. And the process, or the design of the process, is that in the teaching of this system, we get students to upload records from the previous cohort, so the previous year's data records which have been submitted. So they get to work with what students have done in the past year and get to see how they've handled that process, which starts to give them an insight as to what they'll be doing once they have data. Okay, so there's a screenshot of the LUSTRE front page where projects can be described and searched in a variety of ways. Now, I'm going to take another 30 seconds or so. One of the surprising things perhaps is that within that system, there is currently no actual project data there online. It could be, there's nothing to stop us putting the raw data up there, but we made a decision early on that instead what we do is provide the records and the details that will allow students to access the data itself. Because of the scale involved, because we can't always be sure whether the data have been properly anonymized, who would be responsible for it in cases of data breaches or what have you, that it was better not to have at large scale lots of data going online that we hadn't had chance to vet. But in principle, the data files themselves could be made available. Okay, so I think I've just about had my 10 minutes. So to go back to that very first slide, what we're trying to do is foster open science and data sharing amongst our students by getting them involved in the process at the earliest possible point.